would like to introduce our guest. She is an illustrator and concept artist, best known for her unique and very recognizable personal style. She's created artwork for Blizzard, Guerilla Games, Lego, among many others. I'm so happy to have her with us today. Please welcome Lois Van Baarle, also known as Loish. And just a heads up, you can follow her on Twitter, Instagram, and also Patreon, where she makes rewards for her patrons and educational content. So please check that out. Thanks so much for joining us today, Lois.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So please. So yeah, anytime you're ready to get started with the presentation, you can begin screen sharing.
All right. Yes, I'm ready. I'm gonna share my screen. I'm gonna start with a keynote, like just talking a little bit about my process and who I am and what I do. And then I'm gonna switch to my Photoshop and show you guys how I draw. So you guys like definitely like say something if something's going wrong, or like I'm sharing the wrong screen or the wrong thing, like or the camera's not working or whatever, like you have to let me know. All right, deal? Okay, here we go. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen. You guys can all see my slide presentation now?
Yeah, we can see it.
Great. So here we go. I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about exploring directions. So it's basically like about how important it is to work really quickly, work intuitively, and just stay flexible throughout your drawing process so that you can kind of adapt, you know, what you draw to like, you know, different directions, how you can use the digital medium to its maximum potential by, you know, using it to explore and be flexible. I'm Lois Van Baarle, otherwise known as Loish. I'll quickly introduce myself. It's always kind of hard for me to like say what I do specifically when like I'm approached by, you know, like distant uncles or whatever, at like my in-laws, and they're like, what do you do? And I don't really know. Like sometimes I call myself a digital artist, like most of the time, but for my work I do character design. I'm really active on social media, and sometimes I'm a teacher, like today. So I just call myself a digital artist and character designer who's active on social media and shares knowledge with others. I'm known for like this kind of art, so detailed digital paintings that have like an emotive feel to them and have like a high focus on like color and something poetic about them. So this is the stuff that I love to do the most, but it is the most time consuming to do. So next to that, I also do a lot of like, so these are like the more detailed pieces that I like to do that focus on female characters. That's my favorite thing to draw, and inspiration from nature. But next to this kind of stuff that takes me like forever and can be kind of like exhausting to do because it's such a long process, I also do like quicker sketches from time to time as well. So I like to adapt my skills like for more detailed pieces, but also more like for explorations and studies that kind of keeps me sane. I also like to sketch in my sketchbook sometimes. I'm mostly a digital artist, and I learned almost everything I know about drawing from working digitally. But I also, you know, sketch on paper. It has a certain special feeling to me as well. And sometimes I'll go into the nightmare realm of inks, which for me is really hard because it's permanent. So every line that I draw like can't be undone. And that, you know, really freaks me out. So it's really important for me when I draw to feel like I can always go back or always change things, to feel very free. So that's what I love about digital art. The work that I've done, like I've always drawn female characters. I always just enjoyed, you know, drawing that sort of stuff because I grew up like with Disney princesses is one of my big inspirations, and Alphonse Mucha's like Art Nouveau, that sort of stuff. And as a result, I kind of rolled into becoming a character designer. I studied for animation, but character design became sort of my income because I was approached by companies who were like, hey, you know, we think your skills work well with our project, and they would be looking to develop characters, mostly female characters. So I've done a lot of work with Lego in the past on their sort of girl line of toys, where they use a more cartoony style to like show the backstory of their female characters. I've also done work with Guerilla Games. So those are two of the clients that I've spent the longest working with. And then I sort of jump from project to project outside of that. So this is the process I'm going to be showing you guys in a live demo today. I call it digital sketching. And for me, it's really important because that's sort of the workflow in which I can really explore, try new things, like work freely, work loosely, kind of get my ideas down. And this is also my process for my client work. So it's a really important process for me. And the basic idea behind it is like, I just start with a quick sketch. I put my basic colors underneath, and then I'll put my details on top of the colored sketch. And that I think is really important for me, is like that I don't have to think about all the details in my first sketch, but that I can just kind of like wing it and then add the details later. Kind of layer it on top, like as if it was a traditional painting. And then I'll color correct as I go. So the colors even don't have to be exactly right when I put them down. I just kind of tweak them. This is the approach that I've used for my concept art for Guerilla Games. So I worked on the lead character Aloy from Horizon Zero Dawn. And this is sort of the process. So it all started with just a simple sketch, and then adding color, and then layering paintwork on top, layering details on top of those. It's also the process I use basically like if I'm working for a client, like in this case, Amazon, and they're asking for variations. Layering the detail on top allows me to sort of like change and explore different options as well. So this is some other concept art that I've done. It's really important for me to be able to work really fast and to just like, you know, get the ideas down as quickly as I can and be efficient and quick and flexible. But also in my personal work, I like to use digital media to like explore different color options. For example, like set up different thumbnails and use that to like try different color combinations before I settle on like a final color combination, just see what the options are. So these are some quick sketches that I did for this digital painting in the end. And it's also interesting for me to see if I can like try out different moods because my work is like super emotive, essentially, like the focus is on emotion. So mood is a big part of that, and trying to get like certain like warm mood or more of like a dark mood plays a big role in what I make. So using digital media to make those explorations is super valuable for me. So this is also how I created two sort of lighting setups and settled for this one. When I'm drawing, I think this counts for most people, the creative decisions you make are like mostly in the early stages, right? So when you're working on your idea, you're going from your first idea to the final artwork, most of like the creative ideas are made early on, but they take like the shortest amount of time to make. So like, let's say you're drawing, it takes you like 2 hours to make it. You'll probably be making the majority of the creative decisions like early in, like maybe in the first 15 minutes or so. And that's why I think it's good always when I do these demos to show you guys like those early stages, because that's where really the most creativity takes place. And then after that, it's usually just a question of rendering, spending more time like cleaning it up. But it's in that first 20% of that process that the most happens and that you can get the most out of it, I think. So that's what I always try to focus on. When it comes to adding color, one of my main things, I'm going to show you guys this later, but I really want to emphasize now that that's like the main thing to look at. I put down some quick base colors. I try not to overthink it too much, and then I will modify them. So I'll always like put something down and then tweak it to see if I can get it right. And that's because even though there's color theory and there's all these rules on how to use color, I actually think that like you can get the most out of color if you don't look at it as rules, but if you just look at it and just feel for yourself what works. Like you need to see it in front of you and then you know which colors work well together. So that's why I like to tweak them, because then I can just see it myself and kind of like push it in a certain direction based on what feels right. And then what's really important is that I change the line color. So I always feel like, you know, if your lines are like black, which a lot of people have, like black line work or gray line work, that it's not always serving the colors to the maximum potential. Sometimes it even kind of like flattens the colors, takes the vibrance out of them. So for me, it's really important to change the line color, set it to multiply and like blend it in with those base colors. And that's also a process of searching for the right color, which will combine with the base colors. That's really important for all my process. That's what makes my sketches feel like a unified whole, is like the fact that I change the line color and then it blends together. Color editing tools are absolutely essential for me. The one I use the most is Selective Color, but I also use color balance, hue, saturation. So I'll always be bringing in the color editing tools, like constantly searching for those colors that work best. And the Lasso tool is like my main tool. I love the Lasso tool. And what I especially like about it is that you can feather it. So you can basically like, if you like bring up the feather value, then you can get like a soft selection. You can like kind of select parts and make modifications to it without there being a hard edge. So that's something I use a lot. The main thing about my workflow that I'm going to show you guys is that I try to work on as few layers as possible, because the more layers there are, the more like chaotic it gets for me. So I try to like minimize the ones that I'm working on. I'll show you guys specifically how I approach that. For me, it's really important not to think about the details too much until the way end, so that I can keep the momentum going and not get stuck. Because the more I think about detail, the more I feel stuck. So I try to avoid that moment as much as possible. The same as details, I don't focus on getting things right, because I don't really feel like there is such a thing in art. You know, I feel like there's not like a correct way for it to look. It's more like, does it feel right? And does it have like the movement and the gesture you're looking for? So I don't spend too much time thinking about that. I just want to move forward quickly, and I really try to wing it. So I'm going to show you guys how I do that. Basically, like, you know, with a blank slate. So I'm just going to start from like completely blank. I can guarantee you that it's not going to be my best drawing, but I can show you guys like how I would approach that, you know, how I would start from a blank canvas and just kind of wing it from there. So let's see. I have to switch to Photoshop. Share. Are you guys seeing my empty Photoshop window? Great.
Yep, we can see it.
Great. Okay, so start with obviously a blank canvas. So this is like the worst part of drawing, right? It's like when you're not seeing anything, it's just like the blank canvas is like challenging you. So that's why my process is really focused on avoiding overthinking. It's like just getting those first lines down as quickly as possible. So I'm gonna get my brush, and this brush like is super awesome. So always in my live demos and in my like when I give workshops, I emphasize that this brush set is really good because it has a pencil brush in it. And the brush set is called Macalabs, and this pencil is called the HB pencil, this brush. And it has like a nice organic effect, and it's good for like little sharp lines, and you can also use it for like these softer kind of lines. So this brush, I always have to recommend it because it's so helpful to my workflow. And I'm just gonna draw like a simple random character, just to get the sort of the idea across. When I draw, I try to keep the shapes like as simple as possible. I learned how to draw heads from a how to draw anime heads tutorial when I was 14. So it was just like circle, like a cross, and then that's where the eyes are, and then like a jawline, and then like probably sharp anime hair or something. But in my version, we don't have that. But I try to keep it like real simple. The simpler it is, the better. And I'm just gonna kind of see where it goes. So I always feel like it's really important to make sure that like the sketch has as much gesture as possible in the early stage, because Usually the more you draw, the more the gesture kind of disappears. So you want those first lines to have like, you know, the energy of your first like ideas and thoughts, and just have as much movement as possible. And usually like if a first sketch isn't particularly great, then it's always it's good, because that gives you an idea of like how you would want to improve on that or do it differently. So that already gets the process going. Like the very first line already gets the process going of like how you can move forward from there. So I'm gonna just quickly do like a second sketch and try to get that movement right. And with like all, you know, with everything in this character, I'm just going to try and approach it as basic shapes first. I also use the transform tools constantly when I draw, just trying to move stuff around, shift stuff around, because that's the great thing about working digitally, is that like there's no restraint on, you know, you can always like resize things, you can select specific areas, kind of move stuff around, which is what isn't possible with ink, you know, and is possible on the computer. So it's like maximize that opportunity. All right. So I've got like a quick basic sketch. Something that I really like about this brush is that, like what I showed you guys earlier, that I can kind of like lower the flow and then get like these kind of softer lines, which is something that always, I think, like allows my initial sketches to have like tons of movement, which is why I love it. And then I can kind of like imagine, you know, what the overall gesture and movement is of this character as I go, just kind of winging it. So what I always try to focus on when I'm drawing a like a quick character sketch, even if it's just like a bust like this, what I'm always trying to look at is like how can you get like a little lead the eye around the image, right? So in this case, like I know that I want people to like look at her face because that's the focus. So how can you lead the eye there? And then I try, in this case, like to use kind of curved lines here, which will kind of lead the eye over here. And also like if there are curved lines, that those are like the line of action is kind of broken with other shapes, like interrupted by other shapes like the hair, that stops it and keeps the eye there. So those are always sort of things I'm intuitively searching for when I'm doing these quick sketches. And that's why I think it's good to keep the lines like loose and dynamic so that you can, you know, maximize the movement you can get out of them. And sometimes it's just an accident, you know, like you were doodling and then you make that one line and you're like, oh, that one's working. And that gives you something to build on. So once I have like a rough sketch, I think I'm gonna like give her some glasses or something to like add to the roundness of this sketch, because round is the shape here, so I can kind of build on that. Once I have like a loose sketch, then I can work on like a slightly more detailed sketch on top. And what I think is really important is like not to trace over the lines that I've already drawn, but instead just try to find lines that will like add to, you know, add the details that you need to move forward without like killing the energy of the original sketch, but also without like completely overwhelming it or covering it up. So I'm just gonna like try to find those details that are kind of missing in the rough version. And if the rough sketches are a little too like overwhelming, I can always lower the opacity a bit. And the thing that I like about using super simple shapes for like, also for the face, you know, for the facial features, for example, they're just like simple dots for eyes or like a circle for the nose, is that it allows you to kind of like use your imagination, like when you look at it, your brain kind of fills in, you know, ideas for what the detail could be. And that's why sketches, I think that's why people really love sketches, it's because it speaks to the imagination, it sparks the imagination. And that's, I think, the way that you can use rough sketching in an early stage to kind of move forward is like just observe the rough lines and kind of see like how does that, what movement do you imagine from it? What details sort of come forward from that? Even the simplest sketch can do that, and then you can use it to move forward. But I do always kind of turn the layer on and off to check whether it still has the same energy and same volumes that I set up in the first sketch. And sometimes it's not really doing that. So I'm going to start over with a more detailed sketch. And what I've noticed as well is that like when I'm doing character design work and I have like a brief for a character, that getting those very first ideas that come up, like the simplest ideas, usually already spark a dialogue about what works and what doesn't. So this whole process of like just drawing whatever comes to mind and going with the flow, like almost always pays off. You know, it almost always leads somewhere and sort of gets the conversation going, which is why I like to work in this way. All right, so I'm getting a better idea of her face, of like what the features are. I'm gonna compare it a little bit. I feel like now it's kind of moving forward, like heading in a direction. So I'm gonna keep going just a little bit. Another thing that really helps me when I'm sketching is to like try and get a nice variation of thick and thin lines. So if I have like very thin lines, also have areas that are a bit more defined. So in this case, like, you know, with the circles, like just having these thinner lines already really gives a sense of where the glasses are located. But then if I do like sort of a thicker line here, then it creates kind of a drop shadow effect. And that gives like the right amount of definition to really sense like where it is on her face. But then if I'm gonna like really thickly draw all across, it starts to cover the face and it starts to like weigh down the sketch. So I'm always trying to find that balance between both. I'm gonna add a little bit more detail to the hair. All right. And make some modifications.
It looks adorable.
Thank you. All right. And again, I'll go over it a little bit with some of these, like with a lower the flow of my brush, and then I'll get like some of these softer, more sweeping lines that can go on certain areas to create a little bit of additional movement. All right. Oh, I should save it. Yeah, that was like totally automatic. You know that I pressed Control S was like not even a conscious decision. It just happened. And now I'm like, yeah, that should save it. Sketch. All right, so now I have like a sketch. I have sort of, if I look at it just from here, it's the original sketch lines is a little too loose, lacking in detail. And if I look at only the heavy sketch lines, I feel like it's missing some of the volume, some of the like searching lines. So I have a mix of both, and this is what I like to search for, like the balance of those initial sketch lines and the sort of more defined ones, and to see how they can like kind of supplement one another and create like, you know, kind of sing together, I guess I could put it that way. So now I have my lines. I have them in a group, and I'm going to duplicate the group and merge that one so that the lines are all together. And I'm going to keep the group with the separated lines as a backup. So it's still there, but I'm just not using it. I'm just going, just in case I have to take some steps back, it's still there. But I'm actually just going to keep working from this single like flattened layer of sketch lines. And that's time to sort of like lock in some quick color. So I'm going to bring in my lasso tool and just quickly outline the shape. And I always do this super messy. So if you ever look at my digital sketches, you always see that there's some really messy outside edges and like areas that aren't quite right. But I always think that adds to the life of the sketch. Make a selection. I'm just going to choose like a random starting point color. The faster it's on there, the better, because then it's just like those first sketch lines. As soon as they're there, you can move forward from there. So putting on any color is fine. And then I'm going to bring in my hue saturation and kind of like go down the slider and just see what feels right and what's resonating with me at that moment. Depends on the mood, depends on what I'm going for. Right now I'm just kind of like winging it, so I'm gravitating towards like a warmer tone. All right, so once I have one color, it gets really easy to choose the next one, because the second color should just be something that works with the first color, and that's the only thing really. So I'm gonna and I start with like sort of the biggest volumes, right? So now I have like kind of a skin tone, so I'm gonna move on to like the hair next, because she has like really big hair. So make a selection of that, go back to hue saturation, and then kind of like search like, okay, what should the second tone be? And then this is why I love these color modification tools, because then I can just kind of slide it and just see for myself what's happening, you know? Like I know that if I go like out over here and I have it like super saturated, that there will be an intense clash. Like I see that, so then I know that like going for a lower value, more desaturated tone will work better. And that's something that's like really close to the skin tone could work well, depending on whatever you feel like. So it's just a question of exploring and just trying to see what works and what doesn't. So I'm gonna settle for this, and I'm gonna like work on her headband, because that would be like a maybe cool accent color or some kind of like extra definition. And kind of see if I want to go for something dark, if I want to go for something bright, like where do I want to go with this? Just explore. And I think these are always the most interesting moments, when I'm sort of looking for the right color with the hue saturation slider, and I can just see that there's like a moment where it clashes. Like I could just sense like, oh, this is not working, usually because it's in a really similar value range, but then slightly off towards a different hue that for some reason doesn't feel right. And it's something that you need to see in order to know that that's like what's happening. But I noticed that the more it goes towards a yellowy tone, the more it's interacting in a way with the skin tone that makes it like blend too much. But if I push it towards something warmer, then it's similar, but just different enough that it feels right. So that's how I kind of look for the tones. Another thing that I always recommend is like if you're like introducing lighter and darker values, to not go for the most extreme. So like if I want to like make her eyes white, like the eye whites, then it's if you go straight for white, then you instantly like the values of the colors you choose just go to extremes immediately. But if you like kind of go for something that feels like white but is not quite there, it just looks like white relative to the base color, that tends to create more sense of harmony and unity. So instead of going all the way up to the brightest color, I'll just kind of like go up a little bit, maybe see if I can like bring the saturation down or go towards a slightly different hue to create that contrast that makes it feel like white. Also, if you do studies of a photo, you'll see the values tend not to be so extreme. They tend to like come closer together. So I always feel like this is a good way to create more harmony in the colors. Quickly like block in some color here. And then the last thing we need to work on is her shirt. And it's a lot easier to make a color choice if you've already put a lot of colors down, right? Because then you can kind of like see how it fits, how it compares, how it combines with the rest. And does it need more brightness? Does it need a pop of color? Or does it need like, should I stay in a similar range? So I'm just gonna kind of search for that a bit. And I look a lot, so you can see in my Photoshop setup that I have a navigator window in the top right. That's what I'm usually looking at and not at the big window in the middle, because seeing it from afar always allows me to get a good sense of like how the contrast is working out. So I'm looking at it from afar. All right, so now I have these colors as the base colors, and I have this as my line color. And like I said, having black lines usually kind of kills the color dynamic. So this is a moment where I will set those lines to multiply, and I'll bring in my hue saturation and like modify those colors. And I'm going to search for like colors that will be vibrant and bring the base colors together. So I think in this case, since I'm like exploring warm colors, it's good to stay in that range. So I'm going to see like, you know, should they be dark or could they be lighter? Like in this case, the more I lighten the lines, the more they disappear in some areas. So I've got to keep it kind of dark, but I do want some of that like warmth to them. So, and these sort of more yellowy tones seem to work. They're a bit on the light side, so I'm going to duplicate this layer and then I can tweak it again a little bit. And this is a moment where I can also bring in my selective color on the base colors. I think selective color doesn't have a shortcut, which is like extremely infuriating, but it's in the menu. And this is a moment where I can just kind of like move the sliders around. So this is a tool. I actually don't really know what the purpose of this tool is. I just accidentally clicked on it one day and I saw all these sliders and I was like, hey, oh, okay, cool. I like what's happening here. I like what's happening. Oh, look, this is all really interesting and fun. And that's how I kind of found out how it works. And that's why I think it's really good to like, you know, have that experimental attitude when you're using digital media, because then you can accidentally run into something that is super useful. And you don't have to like learn it in advance. You don't have to watch like a super long tutorial that tells you exactly what the point is. You can just see for yourself and just decide for yourself whether you like it. And that's how I approach color, and that's how I approach digital media in general. But for me, it feels good to head more towards like coffee tones for this character. So you can see in selective color that you've got all these different color ranges in the main menu, and you can just kind of choose like, all right, you know, am I gonna tweak the magentas, the blues in my colors, or just the reds? In this case, we have only like red and neutral tones, so it won't really, you know, change it in any way if I tweak the blues slider. But then if I go to like neutrals, it will have some impact. So I'm gonna kind of see where I can go there, see if there's anything more I can get out of it. Like here, it just becomes a totally different drawing than I was sort of going for. So maybe more towards here. Or in this case, I don't think doing anything with the neutrals really works. All right. So now we have a sketch. I'm going to like sort of fill in her glasses because I feel like this is like a central element that the eye is really being led to. I'm just going to do it on a separate layer and put it at like 50% transparency so I can, so that it doesn't totally cover the face, and keep that on a separate layer. I told you guys about the feathered lasso tool as well. So up here you can just do, you guys probably already know this, but you can just type in like, you know, a pixel value that creates like a soft selection. So now if I like select a part of it, the edges will be soft. And this is like a huge part of my painting process. It's not just painting with a brush, but bringing in that colored lasso, a feathered lasso tool, and then sort of like selecting certain areas. And, you know, like now I made a soft selection of her cheeks, and then I can open color balance and sort of like modify the color there a little bit. I can also like take the sort of glasses layer I have here and like select the bottom part and then make that more like a yellowy tone and get a bit of a gradient in there. So that's, this tool is great for me. I love it. Another thing that I think is super important with color, especially like in character art, is you have to lead the eye as much as possible. You know, you don't want it to fall flat. You want to like look, you want the person looking at it to like feel like they want to look all around. And gradients is really like a great way to do that. So I'm going to add a gradient. It's already working pretty well for her glasses. And I'm going to choose a secondary color. And this is another part of choosing colors that is really important for me, is that when I have the color already selected, you can see here on the color picker that there's the new color and the current color underneath. And so when you choose like a second color, you can kind of like, now you can kind of compare them. There's like one on top of the other. And you can kind of see how they interact. You know, if you jump straight into like some color like this, you can see that they're kind of clashing, not working well together. But you can also use that to find colors that interact nicely with the first color that you had selected. So that's what I'm going to do now. And I always recommend, if you want to choose like a lighter color than the base color, don't just go here and like go for lighter, for example, like just go up there, but try to find something that like, you know, try to push it maybe towards more saturated, or keep it in the same value and push it towards less saturated. Like try to explore how you can kind of move this little dot around to get like a very interesting interaction with the base color, because that'll make all those colors come together beautifully. So I'm going for something kind of warm cappuccino type color. I have the hair selected, and I'm just gonna like put a bit of a gradient on there. Maybe that's a bit extreme. I'm gonna tone it down and like kind of darken the top a bit. And I feel like with a little bit of a gradient, we've created some flow, you know, some kind of like visual flow that travels from one color to the next. I'm just gonna push the color, change the color of this one a little bit, and like brighten up her skin tone a little bit because it's a bit desaturated. So I do that with replace color, which is just like a way that you can select one color range and kind of like change it a bit. So I'm gonna kind of experiment with a slightly brighter skin tone. See. That was working better before. All right, so now I have my colors picked out. I have changed the colors of my lines. I have some gradients in there. So this is a moment where I group all those layers together. So I have, you know, my color layer, which looks like this, and then I have like a 50% opacity glasses layer on top, and then I have the lines like that. And I'm going to duplicate that group and merge it. So now I have everything together. Once the lines are like together with the base color, it's just so much easier to draw from there for me. So I just want them all smushed together, and it doesn't even have to be like, the lines don't have to be detailed or perfect for me to do that. I'll just jump straight into that. So now I have everything together, and I can modify everything as a whole. That's why I always want to move towards this stage, because then, for example, if I bring in a feathered lasso tool and kind of like use that to brighten this area a little bit, it's so much easier because it does that for the lines as well as for the color. So now you're working from one whole, and it's just so much easier. I'm gonna do that slightly differently because I feel like it's a little too yellow. Select some areas, like if I have like a lighter area, I can make other areas a bit darker, and that also helps like lead the eye, you know, towards the central point. So once I have this, all I have to do is like zoom in and get my brush. So I like to use a hard round brush, just a simple like plain hard round. Right now it's on very low flow. like this, with the pressure set to, the opacity set to pressure, pressure set to opacity, I don't know. Opacity and size are linked to pressure. So the softer you press, the more like transparent it is and the smaller it is. And then the harder you press, the bigger it is and more opaque. And what I love about this technique of like changing the line color and sort of to something that blends with the base color is like now you get all these new colors already there. So you have like these lighter colors, for example, here that are happening, like these light brown colors. And then you also have like these darker colors that are happening here where the lines have multiplied onto a darker base color. So when I'm like kind of adding definition to this sketch, I can just, instead of bringing in like, you know, going here and just choosing like black or choosing a really dark color, I can choose something that's already on my canvas. Like usually at this stage, every color that I need to move forward is already on the canvas. So I can just kind of look for it and then like start drawing with it. So I'm going to duplicate this layer. Just now I have sort of a timeline of this sketch as well. So I have like my rough version, color version, and then this one with some modifications. And now the top layer is the latest version. So I'm working on one layer, but I have a lot of layers in my file, but they're more like a timeline than like each layer actually being a part of the drawing. And now I can just kind of take the colors that are already there and kind of like work with those without having to introduce too many new colors. And that's how I kind of like approach, like for example here, right, I have like these darker lines and then there are some parts where they're like a bit lighter, and that I can just kind of use that to like start blending, softly blending it in and adding some shading here or there. And then I can always bring in my sort of darker colors. And that's what I always call this technique. Somebody on DeviantArt said this once, like a long time ago, that my process is a bit like sculpting with color. And that's, I think, the perfect term for it, because like sculpting is like you have a block of clay in front of you, you just use what you have to try and find the forms. And that's also how I try to approach like digital art and adding color. It's like you try to get as many colors on there quickly as possible using the multiply sketch line technique, changing the colors of the sketch lines, and then you can sculpt. Then you can just kind of use what's already there. So that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to kind of like clean up some of the shapes. That's why I always say as well, when you're like, you know, using the lasso tool to get those first colors down, like here it's like got these super messy edges. I always feel like if that's really a problem, you can just clean it up later. So that's why it's important not to think about it in the beginning. Just think about it after, when you really need to work on it. And you usually find that like the more you clean up your sketch, the less of a problem it really is that certain areas are messy. So it's something you should only worry about when it actually is an issue and not in the beginning, because that'll slow you down in your process. So I'm going to kind of work out some of the details around the face. I always recommend, if you're like painting and detailing, to start with the focal point. So start with the area where you really want people to look, and you'll get the highest level of detail in that area, and then it'll like be gradually less detailed going out from there, which is fine, because people love a mix of like rough art, like messier art and refined art, and it works really well when the detail is concentrated in a specific area. So, and in my case, it's almost always like near or around the face. Another thing that I love to do, especially lately, I've been doing this more and more, is to kind of use the lasso tool in combination with gradient tool to shade. So I'm gonna like get rid of the feather on my lasso tool so that it's just like a hard edge. And then I can really easily like kind of select certain areas and then grab the gradient tool and sort of like shade it. And then you get like these soft, you get these filled in shapes. And sometimes this is like a lot easier, you know, to do than like literally painting it in. So I'm going to add like a little bit of a lighter color. When I add highlights to my drawings, like lighter colors, I try not to push them. I try to keep them really like subtle. So in this case, I'm only going slightly lighter because as I'm painting more and more, I want to like gradually go to a lighter color instead of like bam, putting it in immediately. So right now I'm going for like something a bit softer and just selecting areas and using the gradient tool to like quickly add some shading there. This for me is like this was like a lifesaver when I discovered this technique because it's so fast. It's like really quick and you can just, it creates like super interesting shapes as well. Like if you take a brush and go like this, it's way less interesting for some reason than if you take a lasso tool and like make a shape, then you get like a much more interesting, I don't know what it is. Something about the lasso tool creates that effect for me. So I'm using it more and more to paint. So, and I'm gonna just add those little details that make it like a believable, just like a little bit of a shadow around the glasses, but not on all of them, but just on a certain part so that it gives a little bit of a shape, a little bit of volume to the shape, and defining some of the edges a little bit. Right. I'm gonna darken this a little bit as well, get some contrast going. And then one thing I always think is like so wonderful about digital media, you know, if you ever feel like something isn't quite right, like construction is really important, but it's also really great how you can just, if you really need to, you can just liquify it a bit. Can you guys see the liquify window that I'm working in? Oh, great. So you can always just kind of like make slight modifications as you go, if you really need to. Right, and I'm just going to like add a little pop of color at the bottom of the glasses. Push that a little bit. All right, so now I have like a quick character sketch, and it was a pretty simple process. So just rough sketch, and now we're here. And when I made the rough sketch lines, I wasn't really thinking about, you know, how I was going to add the colors or how it was specifically going to go. I think if I have like a character design brief, then it's more important to like plan it out ahead in advance. But in this case, I'm just kind of like freestyling it and just kind of seeing where it's going to take me and how it's going to kind of like spark the imagination as it goes. When it comes to like making some adjustments, right? So I'm going to take the character, like make two versions. I'm going to make like a dark and a light version, which is sort of like similar to what I showed you guys before in the presentation. I think that like what I always want to show with this process is that you don't have to like, you can super easily modify the mood and the feeling of drawing even when you already have everything together. And whenever in a workshop I teach the technique of like just merging it all and flattening the lines with the color and just kind of winging it from there, people are like, but what if I need to change something? You know, what if the client asks for me to change something? Like they feel a loss of control because like you can't like get those lines separated from the color. But I always feel like you can usually just wing it, like kind of hack and cut through it, even when it's all together. So I'm gonna quickly show how I change the mood. So I'm gonna set this one to like a darker background. And once I have like a darker background here, I'm gonna make it like a little bit of a blue background. You can instantly see that like the character feels like in terms of value is clashing, like really looks copy pasted right onto that background. So I'm going to like kind of darken the values to start with. I'm gonna lighten it just a little bit. And one thing that I do a lot in my art, which is like just a simple trick that you see basically everybody doing, but I think it's a really good one, is to just make a simple rim light effect. So just add like a little bit of a light coming from the side, which I always think is a great way to show how easily you can create depth in a relatively flat sketch. I just have to look for the right brush. 1 second. Let's see. So I have like a nice, nice texture brush. This is a brush by Shiyun Kim. So it's a really nice brush set with like nice inky lines. And I'm gonna just quickly create like a little bit of rim light from the side. Maybe coming from this side, I could explore how that would look. I think if it was coming from this side, it would like mostly hit her hair. So maybe I could try another one where like it kind of hits her face, if I want to add a little more definition to the face. And I'm picking a totally random color, like on a separate layer so that I can like tweak it later. Let's see if this is working. I think the most important thing about a rim light is to make sure it's not like the same thickness everywhere, so that the thickness is kind of varied across the different areas. All right. Which one do we prefer? The one on the face or the one coming from just behind the hair? The face one, right? Yeah.
I think so.
Okay. All right, so now I have this kind of lighting coming from here, and I'm gonna like change the color a bit, make it feel more like a warm light source, but still feeling like it's really there. So once I have that drawn, I can duplicate the layer and blur it a little bit so that it gets like a sort of soft light effect. And maybe put it to screen so that it's like blending nicely. I'm now like darkening the color a bit and kind of playing around with the color of that blurred version of the rim light just to see like how that interacts and if it creates a nice glowing effect. And once I have that, I can bring in the feathered lasso tool on the character layer and kind of like select the areas where the light would be falling and kind of use color balance to maybe lighten those areas so that the light is really kind of bleeding over onto the character. And if you have like a warm light source, then you're always going to have like cooler light on the other side. So I'll kind of like select the other side and see if I can like just change the color temperature there a little bit. And once I have this, I could maybe work in some of the finer details. She has like sort of bushy hair, so I can draw some of the smaller hairs sort of coming out. And a little bit finer detail along the face. Right. So now we have like sort of a dark mood one over here. I feel like this could be a little softer. Yeah. I'm going to change the background color a little bit to match like the overall feeling. There we go. So now here's like more of a dark background, like light color coming in from one side. And then on the other one, I'm going to try like a different vibe. With a lighter background. And again, like whenever I'm trying to draw, you know, like lighter feeling, lighter colors and highlights. I try to avoid actually using white because white tends to like wash out the color. So I'll just use something near like a cream color or something like that. So in this case, like a light yellow color, and I'll try to add like a bit of a warm gradient to it. Maybe like add a little bit of like a reddish color to it as well. Do that with gradient tool. There we go. So now I have her against this lighter background, and that's like more similar in the value range that as the original sketch. So the original sketch against this light background works better because I drew it against a white background, but I still think that it's like a little bit too like cut and paste. So I'm gonna like darken the values a little bit and try to like set the mood a bit more. So I'm gonna use color editing tools to like make it a little bit warmer. And I have sort of a gradient on the background where it's going from like light on the bottom to like darker at the top. So that's something that I can also try to like bring into the character herself. So I'll just get like feathered lasso tool and kind of like bring in a bit of a warm light source coming from below. And again, another reason why I'm not choosing like straight up white as the background is because now I can add a highlight with a lighter color and that'll stand out against the background. So it's all about like how much contrast can you add. And this time I am going to do sort of the rim light coming from here. And just draw it on a separate layer. Real simple and scribbly. I'm going to like give it a little bit of a color, like a bright yellow, and then do the exact same trick again. So make a blurred version of the rim light. So here the rim light on a separate layer, and then like a blurred version on a separate layer. Set it to screen. Play around with the color. Like, I think the more saturated, like if you have a strong light, like a hard rim light, and then you duplicate that and sort of like give it a saturated color with the blurred version, then you get like these saturated edges around it, which gives the effect of like a really luminous and intense light. So I'm gonna kind of like look for how I can make it feel even warmer. And again, select the areas around the highlight and use color balance to like amp the lighting there. And add like a bit cooler light here. Maybe a bit like bluish. All right, so this is how I can take like a super simple sketch and kind of like make a darker variation, a lighter variation. I also like to show this approach during my live demo so that you guys can see like that's how my painting process generally works. So I start with like a quick, you know, base color and colored lines, and then from there I can add a bit of light, I can add a little bit of shadow, I can take like a soft lasso tool and darken certain areas, lighten certain areas, and then slowly kind of like build on the lighting and the richness of the image until it's reaching a level that I like. So I'm gonna to wrap it up, like go back to the Keynote and quickly show my steps for a digital painting. So I'm gonna switch the screen once more to back to the presentation. Where are we? Oh, there we are. Right. Okay. So do you guys see my Keynote again? All right. So it's exactly like the process that I just showed you for quickly sketching a character is basically like the mini version of making a digital painting for me. So with my digital paintings, you know, I have my rough sketch. So here you can see a rough sketch, not too detailed, simple, basic shapes, like not getting too focused on like what is correct or what is right or which details should be where, but more like what's the overall flow of the image and what's the movement of the image. And then in the second step, I'll put in my rough colors. And then while adding rough color, I do basically what I showed you guys in the live demo, you know, kind of tweaking the colors as I go, like putting something down, kind of testing to see what works and what doesn't. And most importantly, I change the color of the lines so that they blend nicely with the base color. So in this case, the lines were originally like a grayish color, and then at this stage they become more of like a vivid blue. And then I add sort of the details, I sort of flesh out the details. This is the sculpting with color phase. So this is where I will merge everything together and just kind of like go at it with a soft brush, see if I can like make it work. So in this stage, you know, in the sketch phase, the hands are literally just like kind of like this, there's not even fingers. It's like a blob, like it's just a straight up blob. And then in the next phase, I'm like, oh, I kind of want the hand to be like this. So then it starts to look more like a hand. But it's in this phase where I actually try to work out how those hands would be, like specifically what's the movement and where are the fingers and stuff like that. So it's something that I work out later in the sculpting phase. And then the last phase, which is like, if you guys had an extra 3 hours, I could sit down and like just render this one to death for you guys, but then it would look almost the same as it already looks, the character sketch that I made for you. You can see there's to me like not a huge difference between this version of the digital painting and this version, but it's the most time that goes into that. Seriously, just smoothing things out, adding those tiny little details and bringing in the visual richness, you know, just painting over. But most of the creative decisions happen, you know, at this stage when the colors are laid down and the general composition is decided on.